June of 1776, the American colonies had witnessed the Boston Massacre. The battles at Lexington and at Concord Bridge. In the South, Charleston was being bombarded from the sea. Something had to be done to bind 13 separate colonies into a fighting force that would work together against a common foe. What was to unite us? How were we to stay together? We'll find out today when Discovery goes to Philadelphia for a first-hand look at the Declaration of Independence. Discovery, the award-winning program for young people, with Bill Owen and Virginia Gibson. One morning in July of 1776, Thomas Jefferson walked into Independence Hall. He added his voice to those of the delegates in there. A group of angry, arguing men, arguing about something we take very much for granted, independence. But for them, it was a new idea, a dangerous new step on the way to becoming a country.
The city, Philadelphia. The place, Independence Hall. Right inside this building is the Liberty Bell. It was made in England, and after it was delivered here and was being tested, the great bell cracked, so it had to be recast here in Philadelphia.
Ginny, that seemed to foreshadow the idea of what liberty would come to mean to us. We could no longer accept the idea of liberty when it was cast in an English mold. We had to remold, remake it, to serve the needs of a new country.
And it was done in the Assembly Hall. 40 men met that very hot July to consider, talk about, and finally write and sign the Declaration of Independence. This really isn't a very large room. The actual dimensions are 40 feet square, and the ceilings are 20 feet high. The windows on each side were probably closed that July in 1776 because the men here felt they had to have complete secrecy to work out this important document. They didn't want the newspapers to publish rumors or gossip.
Why did we feel we had to declare our independence from England? Our country was made by men who had fled from oppression of all kinds in their homeland. Here they found a great freedom, but soon England saw fit to impose many laws and regulations, and we could see that freedom disappearing.
For a long time, we put up with it. We needed the protection of England. But as we grew stronger and older, we resented being treated like an inferior possession. We didn't want to be taxed unless we could have a say in our own government. We wanted to be able to trade freely with all countries. We didn't want to have the king's soldiers quartered in our homes. We didn't want courts and judges that had been appointed by the king. The Declaration contains a long list of grievances. Many times we had protested against this treatment, but to no avail. The belief in freedom had been growing. In England, there had been John Locke, who believed that man's freedom was a natural right. In France, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." In America, Thomas Paine wrote in his pamphlet, Common Sense, "Government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one." The men who met here that summer were all under the threat of death. If our revolution had failed, they all would have been arrested as traitors against King George III and hanged.
They served without any salaries. All they received were their living expenses. More than half of them were lawyers, and most of them had been educated in England. They represented a population of 3 million people in 13 colonies.
Among them was Dr. Benjamin Franklin of Philadelphia,
John Hancock of Massachusetts,
John Dickinson of Delaware, the Quaker lawyer and the leader of the faction who wished to find a way to make peace with England,
Thomas Jefferson from Virginia, who wrote the original draft of the Declaration,
Roger Sherman of Connecticut, a shoemaker who taught himself mathematics and law at the cobbler's bench,
John Adams of Massachusetts, who was to become our second president.
These are just a few of the 40 men who were here then. How were they able to write a document that told the world a world ruled by kings and emperors, that we were a free people. That from now on we would govern ourselves, that this was our natural right.
Few men had ever challenged the divine right of monarchs. How could 13 small, separate colonies set themselves free?
With the ringing of this bell, the Second Continental Congress started its business every morning at 9. The president of the Congress, John Hancock, sat there. As you can see, it wasn't really an exalted place. Our new government wasn't anxious to raise any authority too high.
That was understandable, Bill. But what the new government quickly learned was that without some power and authority, they couldn't run the country. They couldn't raise money. They couldn't even pass laws that everyone would obey.
There were daily dispatches from General Washington, begging for money and supplies for his troops. One member wrote,
"We resolved to make cannon, resolved to make and import muskets, powder, clothing, but it's a melancholy fact that half our men, cannon, muskets, powder, and clothes are to be found nowhere but on paper."
It's no wonder that many of the colonists felt that we were taking on too great a responsibility. Unorganized as we were, how could we dare fight the great and powerful England? Edward Rutledge of South Carolina said,
"I see no wisdom in any declaration of independence. It means giving the enemy notice of our intentions before we've taken any steps to execute them. It means rendering ourselves ridiculous."
We knew at that very moment a commission was on its way from England, and many hoped it would make peace possible. There were many voices for and against a declaration of independence.
We're too unprepared to talk of war. There's too much delay.
The Hessians are ready to attack us. They must be hindered from getting a foothold.
The time's not right for it.
We are more than ripe for it, and some of us are in danger of rotting for the want of it.
We should first form a league, a grand continental league.
Exactly, a plan first. Though I doubt if we can ever agree on one.
We had some friends in England. Their voices were heard, but not listened to. William Pitt said,
"You cannot conquer an American. If I were an American, as I am an Englishman, while a foreign troop was landed in my country, I would never lay down my arms. Never, never, never."
And still, we in America debated. John Adams spoke out in favor of the Declaration of Independence, but John Dickinson was against taking up arms.
John Adams said,
"We have been duped and bubbled by the phantom of peace. We have been caught asleep. We continue between hawk and buzzard, while every day furnishes us with fresh information for wishing an eternal separation."
John Dickinson disagreed.
Declaring our independence at a time like this is like burning down our house before we have another in the middle of winter. I had rather vote away my place of honor than the blood and happiness of my fellow countrymen. I had rather they should hate me than I should hurt them.
We shall fight with whatever means we have, with rusty muskets and broken flints, with bows and arrows if need be. What is the real choice before us? If we postpone independence, do we mean to submit? Do we consent to yield and become a conquered people? No, we do not. We shall fight.
All of England is armed against us. The wealth of her empire is poured into her treasury. We are trying to brave the storm in a paper boat. When every argument is adorned with passion and eloquence, we should beware of that which may please yet mislead. We shall not fail. Our cause will raise up armies. Our cause will bring us arms and alliances. The people will stand behind the Declaration. We shall weep at our folly. The war will be carried on with ever-increasing severity. The setting loose of the Indians, the incitement of the blacks, the burning of our towns, And apart from everything else, we shall be overwhelmed with debt.
We shall be united. We shall fight for freedom. We shall win the respect of the world. And we shall not die on the scaffold.
Do I lose the affections of my country? Do I lose life itself? I must speak out and speak the truth as I see it.
All I hope for in this life, I stake on our cause. Sink or swim, live or die, to survive or perish with our country. That is my unalterable resolution.
And so they finally voted to put their demands for freedom into a document, a paper for all the world to see. The idea of freedom would no longer be words in the air. It was a gamble. They were staking their lives on this war of independence.
No one had more to lose, Bill, than John Adams. He had already given up much. His family was near Boston on the farm. He missed them, especially his wife, Abigail. Their letters tell us something of what it must have been like then for a husband, a father, and a patriot to serve his country.
My anxiety for you and our children, as well as our country, has been extreme. It is very painful to be 400 miles from one's family and friends. It would be a joy to me to fly home to share with you your burdens and misfortunes.
It is almost 11 years since we were married. Not more than half that time have we had the happiness of living together. I pray God for your health. I feel concerned lest your clothes should go ragged, having no one to take care of you. The children and I do well, but we miss you. It is hard for the little ones to understand why you're not with us at the farm. The constant roar of the cannon is so distressing that we cannot eat, drink, or sleep. How many have fallen, we know not.
I know not when I can return. The business here is as great and important as can be entrusted to men. I long for the prattle of my children. Our son, John Quincy, has genius, and so has Charles. Take care to make them great and manly.
Sir, I have been trying ever since you went away to learn to write you a letter. I hope, as I grow a better boy, that you will have no occasion to be ashamed of me. Your dutiful son, John Quincy Adams, of 8 years.
I believe my children will think I might have labored a little for their benefit. I will tell them that I have studied and labored to procure a free constitution for them.
That was how John Adams thought about his family and his country. While his wife Abigail worked at home to keep the family together, he was in Philadelphia, working to bring 13 states together. Years later, his son, John Quincy Adams, became our 6th president. There were many changes and compromises before we had a Declaration of Independence. In fact, an important paragraph was taken out.
The Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson on a desk exactly like this one. A cabinet maker here in Philadelphia built it to his design. And in a boarding house just 3 blocks from here, he wrote the original of the Declaration.
He used a quill pen, as did all writers at that time. It was made of a goose quill, which is a wing feather. To make holding of the quill pen easier, part of the feather was stripped away from the spine. It was sharpened with this instrument that put a point in the quill, and then split the point so that it could write either a fine line or a broad one, using a little more pressure. And so the quills would fit in these boxes. They were cut to this length. Instead of blotting paper, they used sand from a shaker. When the ink was dry, They could easily put the sand back into the shaker. Jefferson had been selected by Congress to write the first draft of the Declaration for a number of reasons. First of all, he was from Virginia, one of the states pressing for the move toward independence. Then, too, John Adams had told him, "You can write 10 times better than I can."
He worked on it for 2 weeks, and then it was presented to Congress for approval.
As you might have expected, there were more speeches and debates on it. Most of the changes were small. Some felt that calling George III a tyrant was undignified, so they changed it in a few places. Also, some harsh words against the English people themselves were softened.
The only large change was the removal of the last paragraph, as Jefferson wrote it. In it, he strongly condemned the practice of the slave trade and seemed to lay the entire blame at the feet of King George III.
We and the British had been trading in slaves for more than 100 years. It had been a profitable business for many British merchants and ship owners. In the 13 colonies, slaves numbered 500,000, 1/6 of our population. For a long time, there'd been opposition to the institution of slavery.
And that's where the matter stayed. Until the clause against slavery in the slave trade was cut out, there would be no Declaration of Independence, because Georgia and South Carolina stood firm against it. Thomas Jefferson felt very strongly about it.
What a stupid, what an incomprehensible machine is man. He can endure toil, famine, strife, imprisonment, and death itself in vindication of his own liberty, and the next moment be deaf to all those motives whose power supported him through his trial, and inflict on his fellow men a bondage which he himself rose in rebellion to oppose. I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that his judgment cannot sleep forever.
The problem of slavery was left as it was, in the hands of the individual states, to secure unity at a time when we were being threatened by the strongest nation in the world. The majority of states had reluctantly agreed to take it out of the Declaration.
The time for debate had run out. The vote was called for, and John Hancock announced the results.
The Declaration by the representatives of the United States of America has been adopted unanimously.
This day will be the most memorable in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival.
For the first time in the history of the world, a country was being created by and for its citizens. It was not to be ruled by a king or a dictator or another country. We were free men. We would govern ourselves.
This piece of paper was to become the birth certificate of a new nation. And it came to mean even more for the many new countries who were to come after us. This was to become their hope, their goal. And if men have not always lived up to its promise, then it must be the fault of the men and not of the document. For what it says clearly and for all time.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
We hope you've enjoyed Discovery's program today on the Declaration of Independence.
There are many fine books on this subject, and also on the history of this era. If you'd like to find out more, then ask your librarian for any of these books. Pathways to Freedom by Edwin D. Hoffman, The Declaration of Independence with an introduction by Dwight D. Eisenhower, and this book, America is My Country, by Harriet M. Brown and Joseph F. Guadagnolo.
The Discovery Unit's transportation and promotional consideration provided by United Airlines. This has been a Jules Power production in association with ABC News and Public Affairs.